Yes.
And like scroll down. Give her a quick.
I could upload the notes also.
Yeah, you can just post it like all.
But I feel like without the explanation, it's not helpful.
I don't think so. I think it's helpful.
Honestly,
It's kind of true. I'm okay with that. I'll be able to understand it.
Okay.
She's smart.
Erin can do it. We have faith in you, Erin. Okay. So let's see how this works. I want us to determine which quadrant based on the given information. So the first information I'm going to give you is the sine of theta is positive, but the cosine of theta is negative. So how did I know this? The sine of theta is greater than 0. If we're greater than 0, isn't that positive? And the cosine of theta is less than 0. If we're less than 0, isn't that negative? So that means sine is positive and cosine is negative. So I'm going to go back to my little quadrants and I'm going to say, well, all students take calculus. So I want the sine to be positive and cosine to be negative. Well, in the first quadrant, isn't everything positive? In the second quadrant, what's the only thing that's positive? Sine and cosecant. So we know this is a winner because cosine is negative. So we're talking about quadrant 2. All right, next one. Cosine of theta is equal to 0.5 and tangent of theta is equal to negative 4.1. Do you think I care about the actual numbers? No. I care that cosine is positive and tangent is negative. So in which quadrant all students take calculus is cosine positive but tangent is negative? Quadrant 4. You got it. This is the most fun? All right. You guys try this one on your own. Cosecant of theta is greater than 0. And tangent of theta is greater than 0. Good. Which quadrant? 1. Anybody need to see me how I got that?
It's going to be 3 points on a test.
Just because they're both positive.
Yep.
All 6 trig points.
All right, the last part of our lesson today. So we might finish early.
We should.
Enough time to do greater than.
I want us to draw a diagram and evaluate. Yep. So the first one we're going to do is sine of theta is equal to 3 over 5 in quadrant 2. Find the cosine of theta. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is get our diagram going. I'll let you all copy down the problem first.
So like a graph.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm setting up my grid, and they're telling us which quadrant we're in. Which quadrant? 2. So here's quadrant 1, here's quadrant 2. So we're going to make a right triangle in quadrant 2. And I always go by the angle that's by the origin, and I'm going to call that theta. It's always the angle by the origin. And then it's saying, well, the sine of this angle theta is 3 over 5. Well, we need to remember SOHCAHTOA? So the sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse based on SO, right? Opposite over hypotenuse. What does that mean? That means everything's based on theta. So opposite, the side opposite theta, I'm going to label with the 3. And the hypotenuse, I'm going to label as a 5. Then we have to look, because there's signs that play into this, positives and negatives. The hypotenuse, no matter what, will always be positive. No matter what quadrant you're in, hypotenuse will always be positive. But we have to look. This vertical part of the triangle, is that y positive? Is it on the top, or is it negative y?
Positive.
Positive, right? Because it's above 0. So this means this 3 stays positive. What if this line was down here? Would it be positive or negative? Negative. So my 3 stays positive, my 5 stays positive. Now we need to find the missing side of the triangle. So I have a 3, I have a 5. This is a triple. Does anybody remember it?
2 what?
Not 2, no. 3, 4. 3, 4, 5. Let's say you didn't remember that it was a triple. What should you have done? Pythagorean theorem. So since most of you did not know, let's call this an x and use the Pythagorean theorem. So this is 3 squared plus x squared equals 5 squared. So we're 9 plus x squared equals 25. X squared equals 16. X will equal the root of 16, which is 4. 3, 4, 5. Now, look at this 4. Good. So we said my y was positive, right? Because we were going up, from 0 up. But isn't this the negative part of the x-axis? So shouldn't this 4 be negative? So we have to assign it a negative sign. All right, now what I want to do, now that I have this triangle, now I want to find the cosine of theta. Well, the cosine of theta is ca adjacent over hypotenuse. So the cosine of theta is negative 4 over 5.
Wait, how is 4 negative?
Because this is the x-axis, right? So positive x is on this side, negative x is on this side. Positive y is up, negative y is down. Okay, let's do another one. So we have the cotangent of theta is negative 1 over 2. If sine of theta is less than 0, find the cosecant of theta. So there's a lot going on here. It's like a really loaded question. I'll let you copy it down and then we'll discuss it. Are we ready? We have it down? Okay. So first thing I'm trying to figure out what quadrant I'm drawing this in. So it's telling me cotangent is negative. And it's also telling me sine is what? So cotangent is negative, sine is negative. So I'm going to set up my little grid here. And I'm going to recall all students take calculus. Since sine is negative and tangent is negative, what does that mean? That means quadrant 1 is out. Is quadrant 2 out?
Wait, how is sine negative? How do we know that it's negative?
Oh, because it says it's less than 0.
Oh.
If you're less than 0, you're negative. So quadrant 1 is out. Is quadrant 2 out? Yep, quadrant 2 is out. What about quadrant 3? In or out?
Also out.
It's also out. Why is quadrant 3 out? Why? Why is quadrant 3 out?
Because cotangent has to be positive.
Good, because cotangent has to be positive, and tangent and cotangent are both positive. Cotangent has to be negative, and tangent and cotangent are positive in quadrant 3. So what does that leave us with? Which quadrant? 4. So my triangle must be in quadrant 4. And we always make the triangle coming from the origin and perpendicular to the x-axis. It's always how we make our triangles. And where's my theta always placed? The angle closest to the origin. All right, so now they're telling us, now we have to label this triangle. Is everybody okay with what I've done so far? All right, so now they're telling us the cotangent of theta is negative 1 over 2. Well, we need to remember, back to SOHCAHTOA, that tangent is opposite over adjacent. So what does that mean for cotangent? Adjacent over opposite. So adjacent to theta is, I'm not putting negatives yet. So adjacent to theta is 1 and opposite is 2. So we always just write the numbers positive and then we decide which ones have to be negative. So now I'm here looking at the x-axis. Is this one in the positive direction or in the negative direction? Positive x or negative x? That one. Positive x, so that stays positive. That 2, is that positive y or negative y? Negative y. So guess what we're going to make? The 2 negative. How do I find the hypotenuse? Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to have 1 squared plus negative 2 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. I'll put h squared. So we're 1 plus 4 equals the hypotenuse squared. 5 equals the hypotenuse squared. Take the root of both sides. H is equal to root 5. Now that I have all my 3 sides of the triangle, now we can actually find what they're asking us for. So they said for us to find cosecant of theta. Now, sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. What's cosecant then? Nico? Hypotenuse over opposite. So based on our triangle, what is the hypotenuse? Root 5. What's the opposite? Negative 2. And that's our answer. I will give you one to try on your own, and then we will call it a day.
Wait, why did you put cosecant in there?
Cosecant? Because I said find cosecant of theta.
Oh, why?
All right, last one. Tice, were you still copying? You're good? Okay. So I'm going to tell you the tangent of theta is equal to root 3 over 1 in quadrant 3. Oh, sorry, just root 3. Tangent of theta is equal to root 3 in quadrant 3. Find all 6 trig functions. Yes. Yes.
Why isn't it negative inside the tangent?
Because two negatives make a what? All right, what should you have been able to do so far? So what you should have done so far they're telling us which quadrant we're in, which is nice. So they're saying you're in quadrant 3. Remember, it's quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3. So we're down here in quadrant 3. So I'm going to get my triangle started. And now they're saying the tangent of theta is root 3. And I'm going to put it over 1 to make it into a fraction. And now I'm going back to SOHCAHTOA. And what is tangent pair? Tangent pair is opposite over adjacent. Where is my theta in this triangle? Which angle? The closest to the origin. So we're right here. So now this is telling us that opposite theta will be root 3 and adjacent to theta will be 1. After I label the triangle, what do I then have to figure out? It's what? Sure, let's do the hypotenuse. So we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem for the hypotenuse, right? So we're root 3 squared plus 1 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. What's root 3 squared? 3. What's 1 squared? 1. So 3 plus 1 is 2. I'm sorry, 4. 3 plus 1 is 4. Square root both sides, and what do we get? 2. The hypotenuse is always positive. Hypotenuse will always be positive. Now that I labeled all 3 signs, I still can't leave this triangle. What do I have to figure out now? Not yet. Can't figure out the 6. We're still we're still figuring out the triangle. There's one more thing I have to figure out. The signs. We have to figure out the signs on the numbers. So we know the hypotenuse is always positive. But isn't this 1 in the negative x? So that's a negative 1. But also, isn't this root 3 in the negative y? So that's a negative root 3, which makes sense, right? Because what's a negative divided by a negative? A positive. That's why our tangent is positive. All right, so this is the hardest part. Once you correctly fill in your triangle, the rest should be easy. Now we want to find all the 6 trig functions. So I'm going to keep up here, SOHCAHTOA.
Why wouldn't you add the negatives before you do the sign?
You can. It doesn't matter. It's all going to work out the same.
Okay.
That's why I said, sure, we can do the Pythagorean theorem. All right, so I'm going to start off with sine. So sine is so I'm opposite, which is a negative root 3, over the hypotenuse, which is 2. Before I go on to cosine, what do you think I should do? I just did sine. Which other one do you think I should do right now? The cosecant, you got it. So I'm going to say cosecant of theta. Isn't it just the reciprocal of sine? So it's going to be 2 over negative root 3. Can I leave it like this? No, we need to rationalize. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by root 3. So that's going to be 2 root 3 over what?
3.
What kind of 3? Negative 3, not plus minus, negative 3.
What do you think? Negative root 3?
Nope. You just positive root 3. You just multiply by the radical, not the sign. So we did sine. Now let's go on to cosine. So the cosine of theta will be the adjacent. What's adjacent? Negative 1 over the hypotenuse, which is 2. And right after I do cosine, what's the smart thing to do next? Secant. Secant, it's reciprocal. So we're going to say secant of theta, instead of being -1/2, will end up being -2. You got it. So we did sine, cosecant, cosine, secant. What's the last ones? Tangent of theta. So go back. What's the tangent of theta? Good. You're going to have -√3 over -1. But what's a negative divided by a negative? Positive. Wasn't that given to us already? Perfect. Very good. So then we're going to have cotangent of theta is going to be what over what? Yep, -1 over -√3. But guys, what's a negative divided by a negative? Positive. And then can I leave that radical like that? No, I can't leave the radical like that, so I need to rationalize. So the cotangent of theta is √3 over what? 3, whole number 3. And we are done. You do have homework.